True. Let's go to Karma Green, we steady on the rise. Digging truth from ancient scenes, we open blinded eyes. Rhyme sharp like pirates' lines, we break the bondage tight. Kamji speaking revolution, keep the fire burning. Chill drums guide our stride, we march with purpose proud. No more silence, we collide, our voices thunder loud. Politics and history, we stitch them in every verse. From Pharaoh's throne to Yaoundé streets, we claim the Kamji verse.
For the second day in a row, the Angolan capital witnessed scenes of chaos. Burning barricades, flaming trash bins, and a heavy police presence on the streets. Security forces were struggling to regain control. But anger is brewing, sparked by the government's sudden decision to raise fuel prices. Angola may be Africa's second largest oil producer, but millions live in poverty. The hike has hit public transport hard, and with it, the livelihoods and daily costs for many Angolans.
I came to show solidarity with the Angolan people. People are suffering. We have to protest and show support. You see, the cost of living keeps rising, and we don't know what things will look like in the days to come.
This is where we say enough. We can't keep changing course every time. Whenever this happens, we won't stop. We'll keep going.
At least 4 people have been killed since the protest began. Shops have been looted and vandalized. Police say they've arrested hundreds of people. A major taxi drivers association has condemned the violence, but vowed to continue the 3-day strike, saying the voice of the taxi drivers reflected the anger of the Angolan people.
On the 1st of July 2025, the Angolan government implemented a sharp IMF-backed cut to fuel subsidies that raised the price of petrol by 1/3 from 300 to 400 kwanzas per liter, touching off a wave of unrest that quickly spread across the country. What began as a 3-day strike by taxi drivers, protesting the immediate effect of higher fuel costs on fares and livelihoods, escalated into some of the biggest demonstrations Angola has seen since the end of the Civil War. The security forces' forceful response left scores dead, hundreds injured, and more than 1,000 people detained, while the country's political and economic contradictions were laid bare on the streets. Angola is paradoxically wealthy and precarious. Oil exports generate billions in government revenue, yet ordinary Angolans see little of that bounty. More than 1/3 of the population lives on less than $2.15 per day. Unemployment is high, and most workers, well over 80%, are employed informally without steady wages or protections. Youth unemployment is especially stark. Official figures show about half of 15 to 24-year-olds are without formal work. And many of those who did take to the streets described a sense of having nothing left to lose. For them, the sudden increase in everyday costs was not an abstract macroeconomic adjustment, but an immediate attack on survival. The subsidy cuts were presented by the government and by the International Monetary Fund as fiscal reforms intended to reduce wasteful public spending and free resources for social priorities like health and education. Fuel subsidies had been substantial, equivalent to roughly 4% of GDP in 2024, and were slated to shrink considerably in 2025 under the phased plan. But in practice, the burden of adjustment fell hardest on the poor. Inflation and rising living costs were already squeezing household budgets. Different reports cited inflation figures ranging from around 18% to more than 27%, underscoring how volatile and painful the macroeconomic environment has become for ordinary families. On the ground, the immediate impact was simple and severe. Taxi and public transport operators raised fares to compensate for fuel cost rises. Transport became more expensive for millions of commuters, and the ripple effect hit food prices and the cost of moving goods. Taxi drivers' protest tactics, roadblocks, strikes, and visible refusals to run routes quickly mobilized others who shared the same daily hardships. Street vendors, unemployed youth, and households for whom small price changes have outsized effects. In many neighborhoods, the demonstrations appeared spontaneous rather than centrally organized, a raw expression of frustration at persistent inequality and the perception that oil wealth benefits an elite few while the many remain precarious. Security forces met the protests with heavy-handed measures. Reports from civil society groups and media outlets described the use of tear gas and live ammunition. At least 22 people were confirmed killed by some sources, while others put the death toll higher, and dozens more were wounded. The United Nations Human Rights Office called for prompt, thorough, and independent investigations into the fatalities and alleged excessive use of force. Thousands of people were detained in the weeks that followed, and fear of reprisals kept many witnesses and participants reluctant to speak openly. The government has defended the reforms as necessary for long-term stability. President João Lourenço, who came to office promising an overhaul of entrenched cronyism and economic diversification after decades of one-party dominance, condemned the protests as irresponsible and as manipulations by hostile domestic and foreign actors. Critics argue, however, that 8 years into Lourenço's presidency, the structural problems remain. Corruption persists. Diversification away from oil has been limited in its employment impact, and public services and social protections are inadequate for cushioning shocks to the poor. Angola's protests highlight broader dilemmas facing resource-rich developing countries that adopt austerity measures under IMF programs. The economics of cutting subsidies can look sensible on paper. They reduce fiscal deficits and free resources for long-term investments. But when social safety nets are weak, subsidy removals can instantly erode living standards for the poorest and stoke political instability. Without targeted compensatory measures, direct cash transfers, tariff reductions on essential goods, job programs, or other social protections, and reforms risk being read as transfers of pain to the vulnerable while elites remain insulated. The July unrest also fits into a regional arc of resistance to externally encouraged fiscal tightening. In several countries, youth-led mobilizations have objected to tax hikes, subsidy removals, and austerity that seem to compound an inequality rather than relieve it. In Angola, observers warn that the crisis threatens not only short-term stability, but also political legitimacy. As independence milestones and major national events approach, popular anger over entrenched poverty and exclusion could translate into further protests and sharpen political contestation ahead of future elections. If there is a lesson from Angola's summer of protest, it is this: macroeconomic reform cannot be divorced from social policy. Price adjustment measures may be technically defensible, but in societies where large portions of the population live hand to mouth, they require parallel programs that protect livelihoods and build resilience. Absent clear, credible, and immediate social protections, reforms will continue to generate unrest, and the human and political costs of managing that unrest may outweigh the fiscal gains that policymakers hoped to achieve.
Truths go to Karma Green, we steady on the rise. Digging truth from ancient scenes, we open blinded eyes. Rhyme sharp like pirates' lines, we break the bondage tight. Kamji speaking revolution, keep the fire burning. Trumpet drums guide our stride, we march with purpose proud. No more silence, we collide, our voices thunder loud. Politics and history, we stitch them in every verse. From Pharaoh's throne to Yaoundé streets, we claim the Kamji verse.